Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, November 25th, 2019, Thanksgiving week for those of you here in the United States. Thanksgiving week for those of you not in the United States, you just don't know it yet, except for those in Canada who already had their Thanksgiving week, in which case you get a pass. So if you have an official Thanksgiving on your calendar, and it's not this Thursday, let us know, I suppose, and then we'll give you your pass too. You have one coming to you. Daily Coast Radio is live now. We are informed reliably all the way from the main what should we call you? The main stronghold, Portland itself. Daily Coast Radio is live now, taking advantage of the quiet week, and it's supposed to be one, though I don't know whether it will really end up that way. Today, Kagro X, me, David Waldman, and them from Connecticut via Twitter. That's Greg Dworkin coming up soon. We'll just spend the 2 hours tinkling wind chimes and sipping oolong tea, which is a good idea. I have the hot water ready for the tea and no chance to actually make the tea. But, you know, I think that might be better. I wonder if that will help out maybe a little bit. Just to actually, I poured just a cup of hot water, thinking maybe that would help with keeping my throat in better shape. You know, an old, I think probably I should seek some advice from voice coaches and whatnot, except, well, you know, if I can pay them in, like, peanut shells, then I guess we'll be in good shape. And get their advice on how to stay clear for the morning. We got a lot we can catch up on. A lot we didn't fit in for Friday that didn't exactly blow up over the weekend. But I guess Trump's just not going to let us rest during the Thanksgiving week. It's no different for him, I suppose. Anticipating Thanksgiving, for most people, it is a quiet week because it's a short week and your mind is elsewhere and you're either, for the most part, preoccupied with getting ready for Thanksgiving or thinking about the fact that you'll be off now. Most people take Wednesday if they can and use it as a travel day. So it's on your mind. And if you're hosting the Thanksgiving, then you're out shopping and buying things and getting ready to spend the whole day preparing food for everybody. If you're traveling, you're worried about that, packing, planning your route. So most people are just, you know, stressed and preoccupied with other things. Donald Trump, I assume, doesn't get that way about things because he just waves his hands, his little teeny-weeny hands. I don't know how people see that he's signaling them to prepare whatever it is that's going on in his life. But I guess, is he going to Mar-a-Lago? I think he usually goes to Mar-a-Lago for Thanksgiving break. I'm not 100% certain that that's where I think that's my recollection, is that where he spends the Thanksgiving holiday, although I don't know, who cares, I guess. And he hasn't been out golfing in 2 weeks, which is driving him insane. Not that he wasn't already there. He didn't need a ride. Didn't need to call Uber to insanity, I suppose. And it's really bothering him, and you can see it in his tweets, and he's out there going wild this morning. Asparagus Zucchini says that Fred Rogers, now deceased, by the way, so I don't know if this is great advice or not. It was probably going to happen regardless. But he used to drink warmed cranberry juice in the morning. I think he probably just did that because it was like the most mild thing you could possibly think of. And so he just did that. Cranberry juice, I could see. I think that sharp, acidic something or other, but not orange juice, which is too thick, might actually help. I don't think I could do warmed cranberry juice. Are you sure it wasn't that he just had a, urinary tract infection? That could have been it. Perpetual problem for Mr. Rogers, as you all know. Great advice, though. I could give it a try. Actually given to him by Daniel Tiger, I believe. First came up with the idea. And credit to him for that one. All right. It did eventually kill him, so we don't know that we will be taking that advice. Did you see the movie over the weekend? Is that why this was on your mind, or is it the fact that the movie is out why it's on your mind, or is it about clearing your throat in the morning and you just happen to have that advice ready? I don't know. Greg Dworkin joining us on the line. Maybe he's got some interesting ideas and advice as well. It looks like, I think there's some volume on some computers that I wasn't anticipating somewhere. chiming in the background. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. That was just me singing the join David for chatting jingle in the background there.
Chime, chime, chime. Yes. Okay, good. I appreciate it. Many things happening today. I assume you have read about some of them.
I have.
Okay, good.
Let's talk about it.
Someone should. Yes.
Let me give you some three big stories, and one of them branches out. The three big stories overnight,
How about one
or at
big,
least in the last 24 hours.
One little one,
we won't
right.
talk about it much, but just to point out, Hong Kong had elections, big defeat for elites, pressures Beijing to rethink approach. 90% of the pro-democracy forces won. A really big surprise. They didn't expect that. Neither did Beijing. Really? So they have to back off a little bit. But ultimately, unfortunately, it's a very asymmetric situation there, with Beijing holding pretty much all the cards. But that's certainly worth watching. Of course, we have the big story about the Navy Secretary forced out by Pentagon Chief Mark Esper over handling of Navy SEALs war crimes case. And the ostensible excuse for getting rid of the Navy Secretary was that he said one thing in public, but privately tried to lobby Trump to back off. He says he did it privately because he didn't want to embarrass the commander-in-chief. But the fact of the matter is that he did not want to reward Gallagher, who is the war crimes accused SEAL. And Mark Esper, the acting Secretary of Defense, I think he's acting. I can't remember.
Yes, we'll say
they're all acting, aren't they? But he's backing Trump on this, and himself he ought to resign, but he hasn't. And then, of course, the New York Times at about 3 a.m. posted this story: why Giuliani singled out two Ukrainian oligarchs to help dig up dirt, which is, of course, on the Bidens, and how, in effect, Giuliani leveraged the fact that Dmitry Firtas and one of the other big oligarchs named Ihor Kolomoisky, both of whom were in trouble with the Justice Department. Giuliani essentially said, help us with this scheme, and I'll put in a good word with you, so maybe you guys won't be indicted here in the U.S.
Yeah. Well.
And, of course, the branch of that is Devin Nunes denouncing reports that he played a role because people, Firtas and Lev Parnas have basically said Nunes was there as part of it. And at the same time, Lev Parnas has handed over video and audio recordings, which included the least Trump and Giuliani, not clear about Nunes. But they were subpoenaed by the committee, Intelligence Committee, and Parnas turned over the goods. So he's got receipts. It's not just that he's somebody you can't trust who is just saying things. He's got recordings and tapes. We don't know what's on them.
Right.
They just got them last week. But that's all part of it.
He is
and
someone
at the same
you can't
time,
trust.
Huffington Post is reporting records back claim that Nunes huddled with Ukraine prosecutor ousted over corruption. Nunes flew to Europe. At the same time, Rudy Giuliani, crony Lev Parnas, said the GOP congressman met with former official to try to get dirt on Biden. So HuffPost says there's some records that are consistent with that. And the person they were meeting with was controversial former Ukraine prosecutor Viktor Shokin, who was fired for not doing his job. So all of that is swirling at the same time. And, of course, we're going to take a Thanksgiving break. So, it seems to me, if you want to sum up everything really quickly, is that impeachment is going pretty well for the Democrats on the merits. The politics remains to be seen. Trump claims that everything is showing that the GOP is winning on this. Of course, that's not the case. They've claimed that nobody's watching. Average for the 5 days was about 12 million people, which is about what NFL football gets. So, and about twice what the normal daily coverage is. And then everybody gets to go home on Thursday and talk about it over the dinner table, even though half the public doesn't want to talk about it. The other half is going to force the conversation. So it's really next week that we really get a sense of how all of this is fit in. The polling is inconsistent. We do have polling from Civics, our daily Coast partner, that looks at this just about every day. And we do know that sentiment for polling for impeachment peaked, started to drop a little bit, but then evened out during the hearings. And so right now the independents, by a point, prefer impeachment. And there was a big swing after Nancy Pelosi announced impeachment. And during the time between then and the hearing starting, Sentiment was starting to wane just a little bit. Now it's evened out. So we'll just have to wait and see on all of that. But that's basically a summary of everything that's happened.
Yes. Well, this will be an interesting week to see how it plays out with the holiday in the middle. The fact that the Chief Justice is at the end of the Macy's parade this year instead of Santa Claus probably doesn't mean anything.
Probably not. But then again, maybe he needs a side job.
Yeah.
The other thing, speaking of legal eagles,
yes,
the ruling from the federal court as to whether Don McGahn has to testify should be out today.
Well, it's good timing.
Whether McGahn has anything interesting to say or not, I think the import there is that if McGahn has to testify, others might too.
Yeah. Well, it's a good week for it. I guess everyone will have a chance to mull it over during the break.
Right. So I think,
Excellent.
of all of the different stories, really, the Navy one is just weird.
Yes.
And troubling, of course, on its own. But the Giuliani story in the New York Times, why Giuliani singled out two Ukrainian oligarchs to help dig up dirt, is really explosive.
Yeah. And we've done a great job keeping you up to date on Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman. Early on in the show, it was hard to ignore them. They were obvious mobsters. So, okay. Terrific.
But again, Dmitry Firtash and his other partner in crime there, Igor Kolomoisky, are names that are not necessarily household names. But Dmitry Firtash is the one with all the money.
Yes, he's the one.
He also has a relationship to Victoria Tunsing and Joseph DeGeneva, who are on Fox News all the time talking about how Trump is wonderful, even though there's other legal advisors or analysts like Judge Napolitano saying, nope, he's pretty guilty.
Yes.
So keep an eye on those two. They're married and they're crooked.
True. Yeah. And Firtash is their client. He's under house arrest in Vienna. That's where Parnas and Fruman were headed with one-way tickets when they were arrested at the airport. Parnas alleges that he works for Tensing and DeGeneva, translating for Firtash, who is their client and speaks fine English and no real need for a translator. But I guess when you're getting into legal issues, maybe you want one on hand. But he was never, that was never his job. He was obviously just carrying messages back and forth. And now we know what those messages were. Terrific.
In the case of Mr. Firtash, says the New York Times, an energy tycoon with deep ties to the Kremlin who's facing extradition to the U.S. on bribery and racketeering charges.
Yeah, America.
One of Mr. Giuliani's associates is described offering the oligarch to help with his Justice Department problems. Mm-hmm. If Mr. Firtash hired two lawyers who were close to Trump and already working with Mr. Giuliani, that's Tunsing and DeGeneva, Mr. Firtash said the offer was made in late June when he met with Parnas and Fruman. Mr. Parnas's lawyer, Joseph Bondi, confirms that account and says that his client has met with Mr. Firtash at Mr. Giuliani's direction and encouraged the oligarch to help in the hunt for compromising information.
Yes.
Mr. Firtash's relationship to the Trump-allied lawyers, Victoria Tunsing and Joseph DeGeneva, has led to intense speculation that he is, at least indirectly, helping to finance Mr. Giuliani's campaign. But until now, he stayed silent. I was sucked in, he says.
Womp. Oh, well, he was trying to get out, and they kept pulling him back in. That's not mobster at all. Good.
Chuck Rosenberg, who is on MSNBC all the time as a legal expert and a former U.S. attorney under President George W. Bush, says, solicitation of information under these circumstances and to discredit the president's political opponent is at best crass and ethically suspect. And it's even worse if Mr. Giuliani, either directly or through emissaries acting on his behalf, intimated that pending criminal cases could be fixed at the Justice Department. Remember, this is Bob Barr's or Bill Barr's or somebody Barr's, William Barr's, Justice Department. The president lawyer seems to be trading, it's a low bar. The president lawyer seems to be trading on the president's supervisory authority over the Justice Department, and that is deeply disturbing.
Oh, yeah?
As it is. So basically what he's doing is he's painting the Justice Department as something for sale, Giuliani happily peddling that.
Yes.
And so that norm is being shattered. It's kind of at the same time that he's shattering the norms about military discipline, which is not a good thing. Oh, by the way, it involves war crimes.
Yes, right. And remember, everyone, over the Thanksgiving break, do thank service members for their service and/or war crimes, both equivalent in the minds of the commander-in-chief. So whichever it is, thank you for your service or war crimes. Just let everyone know they're welcome at your table.
Right. Now, Devin Nunes denounces reports he played a role in Ukraine, says the Times. The top Republican on the House Intelligence Committee, also known as a fact witness, calls the reports that he met with a former Ukrainian prosecutor part of a criminal campaign against him by a totally corrupt news media, except for the notes and receipts.
Yes, right. And it is a crime, as you know, reporting the news in America.
Neither Mr. Shokin nor Mr. Nunes has confirmed the meeting happened, and Mr. Parnas has no direct knowledge of what may have been discussed, but Mr. Shokin has falsely suggested he was ousted under pressure from Vice President Biden because he was investigating a company that his son worked at. Mr. Nunes on Sunday refused to directly answer whether he met with Mr. Shokin, replying that he wanted to offer a rebuttal but couldn't do so, citing the news media criminal activity in listening to somebody who's been indicted. Everybody's going to know the facts, but I think you can understand I can't compete by trying to debate this out.
Sure you can.
Right. And he later added, after an extended back and forth, the reports were false, and he would get to all the facts after he filed a lawsuit against CNN.
Yeah,
so basically, I think he's also filing a lawsuit against the Daily Beast, which covered it. Yes. So he's suing CNN, the Daily Beast, and a fake cow on Twitter. Right. Just, so people have this in perspective here.
Right. It's important to know what other things people are up to. Right. Everyone knows about him suing the cow. Also, I guess there's a few other accounts out there. He's suing Twitter. He's suing the fake accounts. He's suing now. He says he's suing CNN and Daily Beast. I don't know. Haven't seen it filed yet. Don't know. Just putting papers in doesn't really mean anything either. But
right. And another name to remind people of, a former committee staff member for Mr. Nunes, Kash Patel.
Yes.
Who played a key role in helping Republicans try to undermine the Russian investigation, also has emerged as a figure in the Ukrainian matter in recent months. Mr. Patel is now an aide on the National Security Council, and House impeachment investigators are scrutinizing any role he played in the shadow foreign policy Mr. Trump was conducting as he pushed the Ukrainian government to announce investigations into his political rival. So again, stepping back, the whole big picture here is that Gordon Sondland was right. Everybody was involved. Everybody was in on the loop. And even the committee on the Republican side who's supposed to be investigating this are part of the scam.
Yeah. Well, it's part of the way Republicans like to run their scams is even the people who weren't directly involved, like Nunes going and having meetings with these people, they all have been getting campaign cash from people connected to people involved in the plan in the hopes that they will be able to buy their votes against indicting them or impeaching them or what have you. So no surprise there, but the big surprise part is Nunes was that directly involved.
Records back claim that Nunes huddled with Ukraine prosecutor ousted over corruption. Nunes and 3 aides flew to Europe last year on November 30th and returned on December 3rd, so there are receipts, at a cost to taxpayers of $63,000, according to congressional records unearthed by the Daily Beast. $63,000. I mean, I've taken trips to Europe, and I don't remember them costing $63,000. According to Parnas, Nunes met with Vienna last December with controversial former Ukraine prosecutor Viktor Shokin, CNN reported. Shokin was forced out of office by the Ukrainian parliament over corruption concerns in 2016. Shokin himself informed Parnas about the meeting with Nunes, according to CNN. The meeting could turn out to be explosive for Nunes. Former federal prosecutor Eli Honig noted in a CNN interview Saturday that Nunes may have done exactly what Trump is being accused of, using his office to solicit something of value from a foreign national to use in a political campaign. Bad news for Devin Nunes, said Honig, who noted the sheer hypocrisy of Nunes up on his high horse, preaching about what's right and wrong at House impeachment hearings. So, more to come.
Okay. Was that from the New York Times coverage there, or is from something else? That bit you were reading. I can't hear you. How about that? Okay. Maybe Abby.
So it's from the Huffington Post.
Oh yes. Okay. Got it.
And and everybody's throwing in their little bits of what they found out. So the idea that it never happened isn't true.
All right. Well, that's
now the question
helpful.
is exactly what happened, and that's what's next.
All right. Yeah, because I was thinking there's some bits of the Times piece that I definitely wanted to read later on and discuss, but if we're going through them all, well, then I won't have to. But okay, you got the Huffington Post covered as well. Got it. Thank you.
So this happened,
It
and CNN and the Daily Beast say it happened, and Nunes says it never happened. I'm suing you all. And then the Huffington Post says, well, we have records to say it happened.
Well, now
We
they're gonna get
we don't have records and transcripts of what you discussed, but the fact that you
I
met,
have
oh
those.
yeah, that's there.
Okay. Well, Parnas will be able to tell us. He says he wasn't involved, but I don't know how Nunes thought he was going to talk.
Well, none of these guys are involved with anything.
Shokin. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's all fake. Something. Blah blah blah. Yeah. All right. Well, this ought to be real interesting.
What's all hearsay? I heard him say it.
Yeah, that's right. And I don't know how they're going to handle Nunes going forward. I mean, maybe since they were getting ready to make the transition to sending this over to judiciary anyway, maybe they just let them handle it at that point. Uh-oh. Well, we've lost Greg here, or Abby hit the button or something like that, or else noise has begun early and it was just so overwhelming. Or else the Masons came and cut the cables. That was probably it. Yeah, let's suspect it's that. Okay, how come this is going to take me some time to find the right window now? Oops. All right, Greg, you're going to have to call back again. Give me a call when I'm back. Okay, maybe, are we not back? How come this won't... okay, I got an idea here, Greg. Hold on a second. My Skype closed on me on the big computer, and, All right, let me... Hang on just a second here. All right, maybe I can call Greg. How about that? And we'll try it that way. All right, let's see. There we go. Now we'll make all the noise in here. I'll let you answer the phone. This is great music, though, by the way. I hope we don't get some kind of copyright infringement on this, right? Okay, I guess we're having some real trouble here. So we'll just end the music. My goodness, that's very, very loud. Let's see. I guess I better check the status of the broadcast as well. That seems to be okay and on the air. I don't know why things are going screwy here, but we'll give it one more chance. There we are. There's Greg. Okay. Very odd. I'm not exactly certain what happened there. I think maybe the Skype on my main computer quit, but didn't quit on any of the other ones. So there's ringing all over the place and no button for me to press until I restarted Skype on the main computer. All right. Are you with us, Greg? He is, but we can't hear him. Okay, so that's we're about halfway back. I gather. Let's see. Is there a reason why? I wonder if maybe the application needs to be boosted again. One more try. Greg, are you there?
Hello?
There you are.
Can you hear me?
I do now, yes. You know what I think happened? When Skype closed on my main computer, I reopened it, but I realized, there's another button to press in one of the other apps.
There's always another button to press, right?
Yeah, that's not happened to us
So
before.
I have a question for you.
Yes. Okay.
As we power
does
through
this
these
work?
technical glitches.
Yes.
So Nunes is now suspect,
He is.
but he's on the committee.
He is that too.
Can Pelosi remove him? Technically, I mean that's my question for the parliamentary expert.
Well, I don't think that she can unilaterally unless he's arrested, I suppose. Maybe he has some authority.
We
there.
do know that it's been referred to ethics.
Yes. Committee placement is, in practical terms, is run by the parties. The party organizations choose who they want to be on there, and then it's ratified officially with a floor vote, a resolution naming the members of the committee. Now, of course, it would be possible, I'm just extrapolating from what we know about how you get on, the reverse would probably be true for how you would leave, unless there were some automatic rule that springs from an ethics finding, which we haven't gotten to yet. It could be the case, though, that Pelosi could bring a resolution to the floor removing him from the committee and could probably expect to get a majority vote for doing that. not with the agreement of Republicans, because that wouldn't be exactly Nancy Pelosi removing him from the committee. We've not run into this. I've not run into this idea of any unilateral power that the speaker might have, but it could be just sort of dormant there, having been parked there in anticipation of the question becoming an easy one when you have at least a majority at your command and somebody who's done something that you're willing to use that leverage for. So I'll have to check into that one.
Right. I mean, at least one instance 2 years ago, or a year ago, rather, in 2018, Pelosi called for the removal of Nunes' House Intel chair over the last time that he had to recuse himself. By altering a classified GOP written memo on the investigation, Pelosi said Devin Nunes' deliberately dishonest actions make him unfit to serve as chair of the House Intelligence Committee. This was in 2018, in February, prior to the Democrats winning. And she asked Speaker Ryan to immediately remove him from this position. Not exactly analogous, because Ryan would have been same party.
Yes.
But still, it's interesting. And I just wonder, and even if we don't have the answer today, maybe for tomorrow we can try to figure out what can she do.
Yeah,
what can't she do, I guess, is more important.
We'll see if we can figure it out. But I think... Yeah, I mean, certainly the power to actually schedule and hold that vote and presumably count the votes ahead of time and know that you're going to win it. I mean, that's a power to remove him from a committee, certainly. But usually you have your party's hand in that one, and I don't know if they will do it over Republican objections. But, okay.
All right. Anyway, that's my summary for today. I'm going to finish up early. This is my last day of construction right outside my window. So back on Wednesday, we should be ready for full segments.
Okay, that should be great. We'll have to, we're going to work out our schedule for the rest of the week and see who's doing what. If you're not having construction, that might be an excellent time to try again.
Yeah, Thursday won't be on the show, if there is a show, which I doubt.
Got it. All right. We'll see you later. Thanks a lot.
Okay, take care.
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. And let's see, I think the way to pick things up at this point is to start out with the reading of the New York Times article, some of which Greg got through, and he supplemented it with the reporting of, a couple of their outlets as well, including Huffington Post. But I think some of the detail in the New York Times article, plus a couple of comments I've seen made about the New York Times article, might help us put it in the context that we'll have as listeners to the show. I never listen to the show, but that's you guys. But just because we've spent so much time on Parnas and a little more on Firtash, he's not a household name in the rest of the United States, but among KITM listeners, certainly has to be close to the case with Firtash. The other oligarch we have mentioned before. We did know that Parnas and Fruman met with him. I don't know whether we know from the last go-round whether... I mean, I assume that Giuliani was probably mentioned in those reports as well. Don't know about Nunes, but I'm interested to see how they connect to the previous story. But we've heard about this guy before, and he kind of kicked them out of his office last time, and there's a little bit more detail about this one. Now, But even more than that, we'll see whether it gets mentioned in the story directly or whether we only find out about it through the comments that I saw on the story, but they're important ones. This, again, the piece in the New York Times, why Giuliani singled out 2 Ukrainian oligarchs to help dig up dirt. The 2 Ukrainian oligarchs are not Parnas and Fruman. They don't count as oligarchs. They don't have that much money at their command. It's Firtash and the other one, which was, what was his name? Koloisky or something wacky, like a Kolomoisky. That's it. Don't remember it offhand from the last time we read it, but maybe the name rings a bell for you. Joe Becker, Walt Bogdanich, Maggie Haberman, Ben Protests on the byline for this piece from early this morning. I guess they finished this one up yesterday, posted at 3 a.m. overnight, and datelined Vienna. And you know all the bad stuff happens in Vienna, right? They were 2 Ukrainian oligarchs with American legal problems. Sounds like it's a very novelistic style opening. Okay, it was a dark and stormy night, and they were 2 Ukrainian oligarchs passing in the night with American legal problems. That's what they had in common. One had been indicted on federal bribery charges. That's Firtash. The other was embroiled in a vast banking scandal and was reported to be under investigation by the FBI. And I don't know whether this grew out of this story or not today, but I did see tweeted around this morning that at some point Giuliani was sniffing around about picking up the case, and I wonder whether this was the same case of a Ukrainian bank, I guess a state-run or state-sanctioned in some ways bank that was suing its oligarch owner / CEO, whichever it was. I don't know. I guess they were suing him about maybe recovering stolen funds or something. And Rudy was sniffing around about this case. I don't know if it's the same bank, but maybe we'll find out. Anyway, they had one more thing in common, these 2 Ukrainian oligarchs passing in the night. Both had been singled out by Rudolph W. Giuliani, Rudy Kaludi, and pressed to assist in his wide-ranging hunt for information damaging one of President Trump's leading political rivals, former Vice President Joseph R. Biden Jr. That effort culminated in the July 25th phone call between the American and Ukrainian presidents. It has taken Mr. Trump to the brink of impeachment and inexorably brought Mr. Giuliani's Ukrainian shadow campaign into the light. In public hearings over the last 2 weeks, American diplomats and national security officials have laid out in detail how Mr. Trump, at the instigation and with the help of Mr. Giuliani, conditioned nearly $400 million in direly needed military aid on Ukraine's announcing investigations into Mr. Biden and his son, as well as a debunked conspiracy theory that Ukraine, not Russia, interfered in the 2016 presidential election. By the way, I don't know if we'll get to the story on it, dedicated entirely to it, but well worth mentioning. If we didn't mention on Friday, it might have been out as a story by then. But much reporting or much sharing of the reporting over the weekend about the fact that Republicans in Congress, everybody in Congress basically, has been briefed extensively by the intelligence community on the fact that they could expect, or maybe already were seeing, that the Russians were extraordinarily interested in planting, circulating, and fostering among anybody who would listen, any ears that would receive this message, that the alternative theory was that Ukraine was responsible for the meddling in the 2016 election and not Russia. They were very interested in having people pick up on this, and the intelligence communities was briefing members of Congress that they could expect the Russians to try to plant this propaganda with us. And despite the fact that we were so warned, or maybe because of the fact that we were so warned, many Republicans, in fact, picked that propaganda up and ran with it. I mean, maybe more as a favor to Trump because it was obvious that he wanted them to, than that they were independently fooled by the propaganda. But they certainly found it to be politically advantageous to them and were willing to run with that ball, and we're seeing them do it over the weekend. I think the most widely discussed has been Louisiana Senator Kennedy, who basically sat there on one of the national Sunday talk shows and said straight up, I think it was with Chris Wallace, so it would have been on Fox, Wallace correcting him. You're saying that Ukraine might have been the one that meddled in the election, and the fact is that it's Russia. And Kennedy's answer is just basically, yeah, but it also could have been Ukraine, which, I would love to see them try that logic with him when he gets to work today. Like, let me through, Capitol Police. I'm Senator Kennedy. Well, yeah, but you also might not be Senator Kennedy. You might be an imposter who we should arrest and place in federal custody immediately, pending a full investigation into your background in espionage. I mean, you might be that. I don't know. We'll let the chips fall where they may, right? We'll see who has the receipts. But in the meantime, we should probably arrest you. Does that not satisfy your sense of justice, Senator Kennedy? That's not good with you? How odd. Anyway, back to the New York Times, because they know what they're talking about, maybe. But interviews, or at least they spent more time organizing what they were talking about. So we'll give them that. Even though they did publish this at 3 a.m., they might be more scatterbrained than we are. Interviews with the two Ukrainian oligarchs, Dmitry Firtash and Ihor, which I guess is their Ukrainian Igor. Kolomoisky. It's K-O-L-O, Kolo, M-O-I-S-K-Y is how we're transliterating it. How we're pronouncing it for the moment is Kolomoisky. Ihor, we'll say Ihor. Like Dimitro, he's listed here as Dmitry, D-M-I-T-R-Y. I've seen it variously as Dimitro, D-M-Y-T-R-O. So take your pick. It's almost, we're getting as bad with this as we are with Arabic these days. So Dmitry Firtash, we'll call him Igor because it's easier for us to pronounce Kolomoisky. As well as with these interviews with these oligarchs, as well as with several other people with knowledge of Giuliani's dealings. Point to a new dimension in his exertions on behalf of his client, maybe Mr. Trump. Taken together, they depict a strategy clearly aimed at leveraging information from politically powerful but legally vulnerable foreign citizens. Before going on, I say maybe about Trump being his client. Remember, Trump doesn't pay Giuliani. And that's not by itself an indication that he does or doesn't serve as his attorney, but I think it's probably worth noting that in all likelihood, directly or indirectly, it appears to be Firtash who's paying Giuliani here. But Giuliani, it's interesting, none of his clients that I know of pay him directly, right? Trump isn't paying him. Firtash may or may not be providing him funding through various conduits in order to do this work. But Lev Parnas, who is also allegedly Giuliani's client, has been paid by Charles Gucciardo, who paid not his law firm, but rather his security consulting firm. It's all very mysterious, but nobody seems to pay Giuliani directly for his legal services, which just says so much about how straightforward and up his organization is. All right. So, as the Times set it up here, taken together, they depict a strategy clearly aimed at leveraging information from politically powerful but legally vulnerable foreign citizens, Firtash and Kolomoisky here. In the case of Mr. Firtash, an energy tycoon, which is what we call people who were not sure whether they actually came to power legally or not, I guess. An energy tycoon with deep ties to the Kremlin who is facing extradition to the United States on bribery and racketeering charges. One of Mr. Giuliani's associates had described offering the oligarch help with his Justice Department problems if Mr. Firtash hired two lawyers who were close to the president, Trump that is, and were already working with Giuliani on his dirt-digging mission. Mr. Firtash said the offer was made in late June when he met with Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman, both Soviet-born businessmen involved in Mr. Giuliani's Ukraine pursuit. Interestingly, the task was not to recommend that he hire Giuliani, but rather to recommend, I guess, that he hire DeGeneva and Tensing, which is, they must discuss this at some point, but just again, what we're talking about here is a timeline in which Fruman and Parnas meet with Firtash and tell him that he can get rid of his legal problems if he hires DeGeneva and Tensing. Now, previous to this article, the conventional wisdom, the story being circulated about that relationship was that Parnas had been hired by DeGeneva and Tensing as a translator to help them in their case representing Firtash, same case, fighting the extradition to the United States, which, by the way, just to put this in full context here, Firtash is wanted by the United States Department of Justice, the current one, under Bill Barr and Donald Trump, and he just, happens to be interested in possibly providing them with the sort of information that would make Barr and Trump want to do him this tremendous favor. And, it's a matter of luck, of course, that he stumbles into exactly what sort of information the president would be willing to accept in a quid pro quo in exchange for dropping the charges against him, which is something that presumably he at least thinks he can instruct Bill Barr to do, and Bill Barr doubtless thinks he's empowered to do and get away with on behalf of the president. Anyway, it throws a little curve, a little hitch into the timeline here, because originally we were meant to understand, although I'm sure they will say, well, we never said it went exactly this way, and they'll have wiggle room to get out of saying, that they lied about it, probably. But we were clearly meant to understand that it was that DeGeneva and Tensing, through their own hustle, somehow ended up representing Firtash in his case, and then reached out, needing a translator, to Lev Parnas. They never really explain how they come across Lev Parnas' name for this task. But, they might not even be averse to saying, well, he came to our attention through Rudy Giuliani. We associate, that's true. And he recommended him. We needed a Ukrainian speaker for a translator. And he's like, I happen to have one. It could happen that way. But this story says that there's a different entry in this timeline. That it's in fact Parnas and Fruman are already speaking to Firtash about his case, and allegedly, and this is according to this article, are offering him the opportunity to hire some fixers at Giuliani's recommendation. And that those fixers are DeGeneva and Tensing. And it may just be that they say, Fruman, Parnas, and Giuliani brought us this case, and as a reward, i.e. kickback, for that referral, we agreed to hire Parnas and maybe Fruman, I don't know whether Fruman had this gig or not, as a translator in all this. So, I mean, it's possible that you could say, no, we definitely had both of these things going on at once. We never said that wasn't the case, but we were definitely we're supposed to understand from the previous timeline that it went the other way, that DeGeneva and Tensing were representing Firtash and brought Parnas in, as opposed to Parnas getting a finder's fee for matching Firtash with DeGeneva and Tensing and then getting the kickback in the form of the translation gig. All right, continuing on here, the appearance of good old Joseph Bondi, the Parnas lawyer, one of many. Not McMahon, but Bondi. Or was McMahon Firtash's, not Firtash, Fruman's lawyer. Okay, I get those mixed up. But at any rate, we are talking about Mr. Parnas' lawyer, Joseph Bondi, confirmed that account. That would be that Firtash was given this offer when he met with Parnas and Fruman, who told him to hire lawyers close to Trump. That turned out to be DeGeneva and Tensing. So Parnas' lawyer Bondi confirmed that account and added that his client had met with Mr. Firtash at Mr. Giuliani's direction and encouraged the oligarch to keep in the hunt for compromising information, quote, as part of any potential resolution to his extradition matter, unquote, which is just like, once again, let's make the quid pro quo even more explicit. We've all been concerned about whether or not, well, we haven't been concerned about whether or not. We know from just reading the straight transcript that there was a connection between the Ukrainian aid and the investigations, both CrowdStrike and Biden investigations, because they were mentioned together and as part of the favor that Trump was soliciting from Zelensky. Here we have Giuliani saying that Parnas and Fruman should go to Firtash and say that if you'll keep your eyes open for more compromising information in our investigations that we want, that can be connected to a potential resolution to your extradition matter. Mr. Firtash's relationship with the Trump-allied lawyers, Victoria Tensing and Joseph DeGeneva, has led to intense speculation that he is, at least indirectly, helping to finance Mr. Giuliani's campaign. But until now, he has stayed silent. I need some, cricket sound effects for this. And many of the details of how and why he came to hire the lawyers have remained murky. In the interview, Mr. Firtash said he had no information about the Bidens and had not financed the search for it. Without my will and desire, he said, I was sucked into this internal U.S. fight. But to help his legal case, he said, he had paid his new lawyers $1.2 million to date, with a portion set aside as something of a referral fee for Mr. Parnas. Translator, right? I knew he wasn't translating, that's for sure. And in late August, because, after all, this interview, I guess they said that they interviewed him, the Times interviewed him. Is that, I don't know if interviews with two Ukrainian oligarchs. Although maybe the Times brought their own translator, but it doesn't happen to mention that it's done through a translator. And in the interview, Firtash said he had no information about these guys, about Biden's, not financed the search for it. Without my will and desire, I was sucked into this internal U.S. fight, he said, either in English or through a translator. I'm just sort of curious about that, whether or not he really needs a translator. Continuing with the story, though, in late August, Ms. Tensing and Mr. DeGeneva did as promised. They went to the Justice Department and pleaded Mr. Firtash's case with the Attorney General, William P. Barr. In an interview, presumably conducted in English, Mr. Giuliani acknowledged that he had sought information helpful to Mr. Trump from a member of Mr. Firtash's original legal team. Interesting, because that was Lanny Davis, right? Do I have that right? And then, so interesting. So he sought information useful to Trump from Lanny Davis, but he didn't get it. And then Giuliani attacked Davis on Twitter as representing this corrupt bastard, Firtash, which is really interesting. I wonder how that meeting went. Where there's what's the chronology of that? Probably, I guess, after he had his meeting. That would be the smart thing to do. But then again, it's Giuliani. So anyway, in an interview, Giuliani acknowledged that he had sought information helpful to Trump from a member of Firtash's original legal team. I'm not certain that he did directly with Davis. But Mr. Giuliani said, the only thing he could give me was what I already had, hearsay. Asked if he had then directed his associates to meet with Mr. Firtash, Mr. Giuliani initially said, I don't think I can comment, but later commented anyway, and said, I did not tell Parnas to do anything with Firtash. Sounds like a lie. He added, though, that there would be nothing improper about seeking information about the Bidens from the oligarchs. Where do you think you get information about crime? He said. Whatever. Okay, but Chuck Rosenberg, a legal expert and U.S. attorney under President George W. Bush, Greg told us about this, said the solicitation of information under these circumstances and to discredit the president's political opponent is at best crass and ethically suspect. He added, and it is even worse if Mr. Giuliani, either directly or through emissaries acting on his behalf, intimated that pending criminal cases can be fixed at the Justice Department. Of course, he doesn't work there, right? The president's lawyer seems to be trading on the president's supervisory authority over the Justice Department, and that is deeply disturbing. It's pretty blatant. But okay, that's the most you can say legally. Mr. Bondi, the lawyer for Mr. Parnas, who was arrested with Mr. Fruman last month, that is to say Parnas was arrested last month, on campaign finance-related charges, and has signaled a willingness to cooperate with impeachment investigators, said in a statement that all of his client's actions had been directed by Mr. Giuliani. Mr. Parnas reasonably believed Giuliani's directions reflected the interests and wishes of the president, given Parnas having witnessed and in several instances overheard Mr. Giuliani speaking with the president. The lawyer said, Mr. Parnas, he added, is remorseful for involving himself and Mr. Firtash in the president's self-interested political plot. I guess you got to apologize to Firtash or I'll have you killed. Next up here, a section entitled, subheader here, A Conduit to Ukraine. By the time Mr. Giuliani turned his attention to Mr. Kolomoisky, that's where it becomes really interesting, and Mr. Firtash, he had been working for months to turn up damaging information about Mr. Biden and his son Hunter, who joined the board of the Ukrainian energy company Burisma, while his father was vice president. You're aware of this, yes? Mr. Giuliani spoke with Ukrainian officials like Viktor Shokin, the former prosecutor general, who suggested, falsely, that Mr. Biden had him fired for looking into Burisma, as well as with Mr. Shokin's successor, Yuri Lutsenko. And he enlisted Ms. Tensing and Mr. DeGeneva. All right, we got to get this timeline right. He enlisted Tensing and DeGeneva, trusted colleagues since their days together in the Reagan Justice Department, which means not trustworthy, to help interview and potentially represent anyone willing to come forward with dirt. Mr. Parnas acted as translator and fixer, that's a better title for him, crisscrossing the Atlantic with stops at the Manhattan cigar bar that was Mr. Giuliani's hangout, a strip club in Kyiv, and even a Hanukkah reception at the White House. So there you go. Cigar bars, White House Hanukkah parties, and strip clubs. Was it Fruman's? Was it, what do they call that one? Mafia Rave or something like that? Or that might have been in Odessa. Anyway, the campaign seemed to be paying off with the Ukrainian president, Petro Poroshenko, poised to announce the investigations Mr. Giuliani sought. When the political situation changed, we can probably add this. On April 21st, Mr. Poroshenko was unseated by Volodymyr Zelensky, a comedian and political novice, sending Mr. Giuliani scrambling to establish a conduit. 2 days later, Mr. Parnas and Mr. Fruman flew to Tel Aviv, that's Israel, we have to, in case the president's listening, with Mr. Kolomoisky, to meet with Mr. Kolomoisky, who was seen as Mr. Zelensky's patron. You remember this? This is from the story we read last time. I'm reminded, Kolomoisky owned the television network on which Zelensky's show aired, the show that made him a national star and presumably launched his presidential bid. Kolomoisky, though, was spending his time in Tel Aviv, which is interesting. Okay, that's where you go and meet Ukrainians these days. Mr. Kolomoisky, a banking and media tycoon, there's that word again, who is one of Ukraine's richest men, is also known for financing mercenary troops battling Russian-supported separatists in eastern Ukraine. So, quite honestly, from this perspective, you might say, if you were advising Rudy Giuliani and all this, you would say, well, he's an oligarch, so he's got a lot of money, that's true. And he might be willing to play both sides of the fence, because a lot of oligarchs do. But he is using his millions, billions, whatever, to finance mercenaries fighting against Russian mercenaries, Russian-supported separatists in eastern Ukraine. So he's fighting the Kremlin in this one with mercenary troops. Is this the guy you want to talk to, or do you want to talk to somebody who's more closely linked to the Kremlin? But you tried that, and it was Firtash, and it didn't work out. So now you're going to this guy? But a little investigation probably would have told you, probably not. Earlier in April, the Daily Beast had reported, citing unnamed sources, that the FBI was investigating him, that is Kolomoisky, for possible money laundering in connection with problems at a bank he had owned. He's also entangled in a civil suit in Delaware, I guess related. Mr. Giuliani's assessment, according to Mr. Parnas's lawyer, was that those legal problems made Mr. Kolomoisky vulnerable to pressure. So they thought he would change sides because of the threat of the American case against him. But the meeting did not go according to plan. In an interview, Mr. Kolomoisky said the two men came, quote, under the made-up pretext of dealing liquefied natural gas. Remember, they had the fake energy company that went along with their fake fraud guarantee company. But they were looking to, at best, I don't know, I guess Kolomoisky had doubts that they were even trying to get into the gas business. But the other storyline seemed to suggest that they were interested in, while they were trying to dig up this dirt, if they were interested in anything else besides the dirt, it might have been that they wanted to push aside various competitors in the oil and gas industry and accuse them of corruption to get them out of the way so that they could pick up those profits. Okay, so Kolomoisky says that Parnas and Fruman came under the made-up pretext of dealing liquefied natural gas, but as soon as it became clear that what they really wanted was a meeting between Giuliani and Zelensky, he abruptly sent them on their way. The exchange, he said, went like this. I say, did you see a sign on the door that says meetings with Zelensky arranged here? They said, no. I said, well then, you've ended up in the wrong place. I mean, that's pretty blunt, right? Mr. Kolomoisky, who has denied wrongdoing in the bank case, said he had not been contacted by the FBI. A bureau spokesman declined to say whether the oligarch was under investigation. After the Kolomoisky meeting, after the meeting's unsuccessful end, Giuliani tweeted about the Daily Beast article and gave an interview to a Ukrainian journalist. Mr. Zelensky, he warned, quote, must cleanse himself from hangers-on from his past and from criminal oligarchs Ihor Kolomoisky and others. Kolomoisky offered a big warning of his own. But you see what's happening here? Giuliani went to Kolomoisky to try and get a meeting with Zelensky. Kolomoisky said, no way, I'm not arranging a meeting for you with Zelensky. That's not what I do. And I don't know whether he said, I don't like you. So, but at any rate, his reaction to it, Giuliani, was to then go to Twitter and try to get to the press and accuse Kolomoisky of corruption, to undermine him, to land him in yet more trouble, and I guess to punish him for not agreeing to give him the meeting that he wanted with Zelensky. So, some things that he's going to, what was it that Trump said about Yovanovitch? Some things are going to happen to him, or he's going to start going through some things. So, I don't know. I don't know if you can scare an oligarch by saying that he's going to go through some things. They go through things all the time. All right, we'll sum this one up by reading this last little bit. Kolomoisky offered a warning of his own, predicting in the Ukrainian press that, quote, a big scandal may break out, and not only in Ukraine, but in the United States. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. There was one more line to that, by the way, before we cut out for the break. Kolomoisky offering the warning of his own, right? Predicting at the time. When was the timeline of this thing? Does it say here when they spoke? I think that would have been June, perhaps? Let me see if I can... there we go. Earlier in April, there was this article that he referred to. I think it was in June that they said... Well, the meeting was in April, and then the article was in April. Oh, well. But at any rate, sometime considerably earlier than end of September, beginning of October, when the, I guess what we'll call the Ukraine scandal seemed to break wide. So early summer, Kolomoisky is saying a big scandal may break out, and not only in Ukraine, but in the United States. That is... it may turn out to be a clear conspiracy against Biden. And that's certainly what appears to have been developing over the last month or two as central to the story being investigated here. All right. Next up, help to fight an extradition. Now, the pair, that would be Fruman and Parnas, fared better with Mr. Firtash. For several years, Mr. Firtash's most visible lawyer had been Lanny Davis, a well-connected Democrat who also represented Mr. Trump's fixer-turned-antagonist, Michael Cohen. This is so amazing. Anyway, a small closed circle here. In a television appearance in March, Mr. Giuliani had attacked Mr. Davis for taking money from the oligarch, citing federal prosecutors' contention that he was tied to a top Russian mobster, a charge Mr. Firtash has denied. Time out just a second here. And try and get the chronology correct here. So, in March, Giuliani attacks Davis. So, earlier than that. Lanny Davis is representing Firtash. But what happens here is Davis also represents Cohen once Cohen turns on Trump. So in March, I guess, of this year, perhaps? It seems so long ago, all right? I guess so in March of this year, Michael Cohen at that point is about to go to jail, right? Giuliani attacks Davis because he represents Cohen, and Cohen is turning on Trump. So in order to defend Trump, Giuliani attacks Cohen indirectly by attacking Cohen's lawyer, Lanny Davis, for representing Firtash. And the attack is that, I guess, the idea is supposed to be, well, Michael Cohen is a liar and a corrupt guy. And you know this because his lawyer, Lanny Davis, is in the habit of representing corrupt guys like Dmitry Firtash, who you know is corrupt because he's been indicted in the United States on bribery charges. And it's said that he is tied to a top Russian mobster, a charge Firtash has denied. But you see what's happening here. So at this point in March, because Cohen has turned against Trump, Giuliani, defending Trump, attacks Cohen's lawyer for representing a corrupt Ukrainian oligarch who's so bad that he's not only tied to top Russian mobsters in the Kremlin, but has already been indicted here in the United States on bribery charges. So at this point, we are anti-Firtash because being anti-Firtash allows him to make an oblique attack on Michael Cohen because Michael Cohen has been making a direct attack on Donald Trump. Now, however, Mr. Giuliani wanted Mr. Firtash's help. So, after being largely rebuffed by a member of the oligarch's legal team in early June, he hit upon another approach. According to Mr. Parnas's lawyer, persuading Mr. Firtash to hire more amenable counsel. So, Firtash remembers that Giuliani attacked Cohen by attacking Davis by saying that Firtash was a corrupt oligarch and tied to the Russian mob. Giuliani wants Firtash's help, but Firtash remembers this. And it says here, after being largely rebuffed by a member of the oligarch's legal team. And it doesn't say that it was Davis. It could have been a partner of some kind. Certainly he had been working with Davis if he was already his legal counsel. And he may have said, I don't like the way you treated Lanny Davis, so therefore take a hike. And Parnas says, maybe, or Parnas's lawyer anyway, says that somebody in the Giuliani circle says, well, maybe you can convince Firtash to hire more amenable counsel who won't tell us to get lost because of what we did to Lanny Davis. How can we convince him to hire more amenable counsel? I guess you want to get the word to him that Lanny Davis and whoever his partners are, they're outside Trump's circle. They're nominally Democrats, I guess. They were once in better standing, but not with us. They were never in really good standing with us on the progressive side of things. But anyway, they might have told him, yeah, you're not going to get anywhere with the American Justice Department unless you hire a Trump crony. I have some in mind for you, and maybe you'll do better that way. And coincidentally, they may also convince you that it's in your interest to talk to me, Rudy Giuliani, and give me dirt on Joe Biden and or CrowdStrike. All right, the article continues. There was a brief discussion about Mr. Giuliani's taking on that role himself, the lawyer role. But Mr. Giuliani said he decided against it, probably because he was about to lose his license everywhere. According to Mr. Parnas's lawyer, that is when Mr. Giuliani charged Mr. Parnas with persuading the oligarch to replace Mr. Davis with Ms. Tensing and Mr. DeGeneva. The men secured the June meeting with Mr. Firtash in Vienna after a mutual acquaintance, whom Mr. Firtash declined to name, vouched for them. In the interview, Mr. Firtash said it had been clear to him that the two emissaries were working for Mr. Giuliani. The oligarch, a major player in the Ukrainian gas market, said Mr. Parnas and Mr. Fruman initially pitched him on a deal to sell American liquefied natural gas to Ukraine via a terminal in Poland. While the deal didn't make sense financially, he said, he entertained it for a time, even paying for the men's travel expenses, because they had something else to offer. So, all right. Giuliani has dispatched them to go talk to Firtash. Firtash picks up the tab. Firtash is paying for Giuliani's operation right there. Whole thing? I don't know. Part of it? Yes. The important part? Yes. They said, we may help you. We are offering you good lawyers, or offering to you good lawyers in D.C. who might represent you and deliver this message to the United States DOJ, Mr. Firtash recalled, referring to the Justice Department. So that's what Parnas and Fruman came to say. Somebody vouched for them. They got a meeting in June in Vienna, and they said, I got an idea for you. We'll give you some lawyers. They're close to Trump. That might help you get out of this extradition problem. Then you'll talk to Giuliani about the other stuff. The oligarch had been arrested in Vienna in 2014 at the American authorities' request after his indictment on charges of bribing Indian officials for permission to mine titanium for Boeing. Mr. Firtash, who denies the charges, was free on bail, but an Austrian court has cleared the way for his extradition to the United States. In hopes of blocking that order, Mr. Firtash and his Vienna lawyers had filed records showing that a key piece of evidence, a document known as Exhibit A, that was said to lay out the bribery scheme, had been prepared not by Mr. Firtash's firm, but by the global consultancy McKinsey and Company. Does that matter? Let's find out. But Mr. Firtash's legal team had been unable to persuade federal prosecutors to withdraw it. McKinsey has denied recommending bribery or other illegal acts. So interesting. So I guess the key exhibit, the key piece of evidence in here that somebody wrote down, here's what you do. Pay these guys a bunch of money in India and then ask them to let you do the titanium mining and then sell them titanium to Boeing. The claim is, this document clearly says that, but we didn't write it. It's not an internal Firtash company. I don't know what he called his firm. It had one of those unpronounceable names, I think. It wasn't our company that wrote this document. This was instead something sent to us by McKinsey and Company. McKinsey and Company says, well, we didn't recommend you bribe anybody or do anything illegal. But I guess that's the claim. Well, they sent me this memo that said I should do this, but I didn't do it, and it wasn't mine. It wasn't my idea. But the fact that I have the document is what's substantiating these bribery charges. That's the claim. Ms. Tensing and Mr. DeGeneva, the Giuliani emissaries told him, are in a position to insist to correct the record and call back Exhibit A as evidence, Mr. Firtash recalled. Maybe he does need a translator. So he hired the lawyers, he said, on a 4-month contract for a singular task to arrange a meeting with the Attorney General, I guess at this point is now Barr, and persuade him to withdraw Exhibit A, to get the Attorney General of the United States to intervene in this case and get rid of one exhibit in the evidentiary offerings. That's pretty amazing. He said their contract was for $300,000 a month, including Mr. Parnas's referral fee / translator, right? A person with direct knowledge of the arrangement said Mr. Parnas's total share was $200,000. Ms. Tensing declined to discuss the payment, but had said previously that it was for case-related translation. So that was the most harmless explanation she could come up with for giving him the money, whether $200,000, right? So interesting. The contract pays DeGeneva and Tensing get $300,000 a month. Parnas, it was a 4-month thing, right? So that's the $1.2 million. The 0.2 of the 1.2 million, the 0.2 part goes to Parnas. And the excuse is translator. There was one more, why they couldn't just say it's a finder's fee, but then I guess that would say, well, how did he find you? And then it would lead to Giuliani and the rest of it. So they used the cover of translation instead. All right, that's good thinking for a criminal conspiracy. There was one more piece to Parnas's play. Per Giuliani's instructions, Mr. Parnas's lawyer said, his client informed Mr. Firtash. Again, per Giuliani's instructions, Parnas tells Firtash that Tensing and diGenova were interested in collecting information on the Bidens. It was the former vice president who had pushed the Ukrainian government to eliminate middleman gas brokers like Mr. Firtash and diversify the country's supply away from Russia. So interesting. In addition to, we've discussed this, I think, but it deserves to be reiterated. In addition to coming to Ukraine and pushing them to get rid of Viktor Shokin because he himself was likely corrupt and was not energetically pursuing obvious cases of corruption in Ukraine, and everybody wanted him out. IMF, most of Western Europe, the United States, all of that. But in addition to all of that, Biden was also pushing the Ukrainian government to restructure the gas markets to eliminate the middlemen, because that was where so much of the corruption was springing from. By the way, that also an idea behind the candidacy of Yulia Tymoshenko. And to the extent that it succeeded in pushing Firtash out, Firtash came away with axes to grind against both Biden and Tymoshenko. Tymoshenko ended up in jail in Ukraine. Biden was never going to end up in jail in Ukraine, but if he could end up in jail or in trouble, or at least being denied the presidency in the United States, I'm sure Firtash would have enjoyed that as well. So, continuing with the article, while Mr. Firtash declined to say whether anyone linked to the dirt digging efforts had asked him for information, he was adamant that he had not provided any. Doing so might have helped Mr. Giuliani, he said, but it would not have helped him with his legal problems. He at least recognizes that, or at least recognizes that that's a better story with the DOJ, since they apparently to date have been unresponsive to the I'm pro-Trump, so let me go play. It's amazing how much independence the DOJ has been left with, even though we know Barr is doing everything he can to erase that wherever he can stamp it out. All right, continuing on here. I can tell you only one thing, he said. I do not have any information. I did not collect any information. I didn't finance anyone who would collect that information. And it would be a big mistake from my side if I decided to be involved in such a fight. That feels like a lot more than just one thing, but that's the story he needs to tell. At any rate, Ms. Tensing and Mr. diGenova. I'm curious about why they list them this way. Isn't the law firm diGenova and Tensing? I'm used to seeing it that way, but they keep doing it the other way. At any rate, Ms. Tensing and Mr. diGenova soon delivered for Mr. Firtash, arranging the meeting with Attorney General Barr. But by the time they met in mid-August, the ground had shifted. The whistleblower's complaint laying out Mr. Trump's phone call with Mr. Zelensky and Mr. Giuliani's activities in Ukraine had been forwarded to the Justice Department and described in detail to Mr. Barr. What's more, concerns about intervening in the Firtash case had been raised by some inside the Justice Department, according to two people with knowledge of the matter. The department declined to comment, but Mr. Firtash said the Attorney General ultimately told the lawyers to go back to Chicago, where the case had been initially brought, and deal with the prosecutors there. So Barr thought it was too hot for him to get involved. That's interesting. Too hot to touch, even for him at this point. Mr. Firtash continues, however, to have faith in Ms. Tensing and Mr. diGenova's ability to work the Justice Department angle. Their contract was just extended, at least through year's end. Next up, documents leaked. If Mr. Firtash had nothing to offer, Mr. Giuliani still got some results. After Ms. Tensing and Mr. diGenova came on board, confidential documents from Mr. Firtash's case file, mysteriously, no, that word is not in there, began to find their way into articles by John Solomon, a conservative reporter, and that should be in scare quotes, whom Mr. Giuliani has acknowledged using to advance his claims about the Bidens. Mr. Solomon is also a client of Ms. Tensing. How interesting, all of the integration here. One article, citing internal memos circulated among Mr. Firtash's lawyers, disclosed that the Office of the Special Counsel, Robert Mueller, here, I wanted to make a note here for our John Solomon follow-up. I don't think we ever did get to an article I've been holding there. Maybe that's a good addition to this if we can get through it. So, again, in confidential documents from Mr. Firtash's case file begin to find their way to Solomon. Solomon's a client of Tensing. This sounds like actually a violation of attorney-client privilege by Tensing as between her and Firtash, but it's up to Firtash to press that if he wants to, and he's busy believing that Tensing will get his case dismissed with the Justice Department, so he won't be doing that anytime soon. One article, citing internal memos circulating among Mr. Firtash's lawyers, that is, Tensing and Geneva now, disclosed that the Office of the Special Counsel, Robert Mueller, had offered a deal to Mr. Firtash, this is why they would expose it, if he could help with their investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. Mr. Giuliani, who was a former federal prosecutor, was aware that such discussions are hardly unusual, took the story a step further. In an appearance on Fox News, he alleged that the offer to Mr. Firtash amounted to an attempt to suborn perjury, but said the oligarch had refused to, quote, lie to get out of the case, unquote, against him. So now he's back on Firtash's side here at this point in the game. Then, after the meeting with Mr. Barr, Mr. Solomon posted a sworn affidavit from Mr. Shokin, the former Ukrainian prosecutor, repeating his contention that Mr. Biden had pressed for his firing to short-circuit his investigations, which weren't actually happening. Mr. Giuliani was soon waving the affidavit around on television. Remember that one? Without explaining that it had been taken by a member of Mr. Firtash's legal team to support his case. That's the value of all these interlocking relationships here. So he's got access to this information that he thinks will help his case because he's set up the representation of Firtash for this narrow legal purpose with Tensing and DeGeneva, who are willing to leak him all of this confidential information. Okay. Firtash said he had not authorized the documents released and hoped his lawyers had not either. He said the affidavit had been filed confidentially with the Austrian court because it also included the former prosecutor's statement that Mr. Biden had been instrumental in blocking Mr. Firtash's return to political life in Ukraine, an assertion that Mr. Firtash believes speaks to the political nature of the case against him. Of course, he had been instrumental in blocking the return to political life in Ukraine of Yulia Tymoshenko, but whatever. Ms. Tensing and Mr. DeGeneva declined to say whether they had played a role in leaking the documents. They did. But Mark Corallo, a spokesman for their law firm, said that the pair, quote, took the Firtash case for only one reason. They believe that Mr. Firtash is innocent of the charges brought against him. It was just an international altruistic outreach thing that they did. No connection to anything. When Mr. Parnas and Mr. Fruman were arrested, they were at Dulles International Airport awaiting a flight to Vienna, where they had arranged to have the Fox News host Sean Hannity interview Mr. Shokin. Mr. Giuliani was planning to join them the next day, he said in an interview. At this point, arrest Sean Hannity already. If you had if there was a non-Trump administration in place here investigating this afterwards, like if Trump is ever removed or loses for his re-election and is replaced by somebody else, that I know we look forward, not backward, etc., but all these people need to be rounded up in one big arrest and sorted out, obviously. Okay, a bemused Mr. Kolomoisky has watched the events unfold from Ukraine, not Tel Aviv, where he returned after Mr. Zelensky's victory. I guess it was sort of an exile in Israel during the Poroshenko administration for him. Okay. But then his guy wins the presidency, so he comes back. Initially, he didn't believe that Mr. Parnas was all that connected, he said. But after Mr. Giuliani started going after him, that is, after Kolomoisky, I was able to connect A to B. Right? So Parnas shows up and says, we can, help fix something. What was it he was looking for? I can't even remember. Oh, yeah, we want to get a meeting for Giuliani with Zelensky. And they were like, well, is Parnas really connected or what? Although he did say Giuliani's name. Then Giuliani starts going after him. I was able to connect A to B. I don't think he had difficulty connecting Parnas and Giuliani, given what the request was. But I guess once he saw Giuliani in the press as part of an overall Trump strategy, going after Kolomoisky, going after himself, then he got to see, all right, Parnas is hooked into something, whatever system, not just knowing Mr. Giuliani, but he's hooked into whatever system frees Giuliani to launch attacks like this. Although Giuliani seems to do it with or without approval from Trump himself. But okay, just to wind things up here, he said he has since made peace with Mr. Parnas, Kolomoisky, I guess, and had spoken to him several times, including the night before he was detained. In their conversations, he said, Mr. Parnas made no secret that he was helping Mr. Firtash with his legal case. And while Mr. Kolomoisky insisted that neither Parnas nor Fruman had mentioned his own legal travails, he added, had they, I would have said, let's watch Firtash and train on Firtash. When Firtash comes back here and everything is okay, I will be your next client. Gotcha. Okay. It's not that he's, ideologically opposed to helping Parnas or Fruman or even Giuliani or even Trump. It's just that he's skeptical of whether or not these guys are able to deliver. If you can deliver for Firtash, then I'll think about paying you as well. So it becomes very important for another payday for Parnas and Fruman and presumably Tensing and DeGeneva and maybe Giuliani to get the charges dropped against Firtash, not only so that they can get paid for what they've been paid to do, or rather maybe even get a bonus for the work they've been doing for Firtash, but they could pick up a second bonus and payday from Kolomoisky as well, who, despite throwing them out of his office, is willing to pay if it means getting some charges dismissed against him. It's very interesting. So a terrific treasure trove of detail there. I don't know how you come away from reading that and get the idea that there's anything left to discuss in the case against Trump, but that he's guilty and everyone around him needs to go to prison. But, people are willing to swallow just about anything in order to get a piece of the Trump gravy train, I guess. I think I saw Greg Sargent putting it well earlier. I don't know if it was early today or yesterday or even earlier that he was saying he was pushing one of his pieces around that made this argument, but trying to remind people that framing the question as one of whether or not impeachment or the impeachment hearings were changing Republican minds on what ought to be done. He was just sort of pointing out there aren't any Republican minds at all, and there are none in play, certainly on this. And all you have to do is really take a look at the way Senator Kennedy from Louisiana has approached the problem, asked whether or not anything had been proven here. Not only did he deny that anything had been proven, he stuck with the Ukraine conspiracy theory, despite the fact that the American intelligence community has warned him that that is a Russian plant and that the Russians would be doing everything they could to get him to say that. He still insists on saying that. So you lay out all the facts of the impeachment investigation from last week and all the damning details there, and I guess eventually all the damning details of the New York Times piece, Kennedy's response is still, yeah, but it still could have been Ukraine, which is basically like saying, yeah, it still could have been the 400-pound guy on the bed somewhere. So very disappointing in terms of, the health of representative democracy here in the United States. Okay, time now to head into our third and final break. We got the music all queued up. And, there's an optimistic view of all of this. Before we head over into John Solomon territory after the break, Jack Ox tweeting to us here along with a Raw Story link. The chaos of Trumpism could be a prelude to an era of reform, and we're already seeing the signs. A political scientist says, I am an optimist, in a story over in Raw Story. Perhaps we'll take a peek at that after the break. Thanks, Jack. Well done. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I'm so confused about where I am. I don't even know that I'm on Netroots Radio. It's true. Let's see. I got two screens going here at the moment. Just by way of following up on the comment that Jack Ox had sent us. The article referred to here is one, again, in Raw Story. Matthew Chapman is, is this our, he's the writer on it. And the political scientist we're talking about is Lee Drutman, Drutman. I guess, okay. Those are, oh yes, well, all right. Raw Story, frequently, like we do over at Daily Kos, not reporting the story directly, but reporting on the reportage of the story. This over in the New York Times. Let me just open that one up so that you know what we're talking about. The I guess the direct line here is the opinion piece, Why the Searing Politics of the Trump Era Give Me Hope. American Political History Suggests that an Age of Renewal Lies Ahead, by Lee Drutman. I guess I'll say this, not far removed, but it's certainly a more refined retelling of the theory that likewise feeds, perhaps less reliably, the insistence, for instance, that, okay, sure, the Trump era is terrible, but it will fuel a backlash against him that, say, might fuel a populist, progressive uprising, a revolution in this country, often talked about in hopeful and glowing terms by, a lot of people, but I guess most closely associated in some cases anyway. Some of you might disagree, but most closely associated with Bernie Sanders supporters of various stripes, some of whom, put an awful lot of stock in it, like, say, Susan Sarandon. Others of whom said, well, I would be hopeful for that as well, and I guess that would be not that far removed from where Lee Drutman is. Is there... I'm not certain whether it would be wise to read the piece itself or the summation of the piece provided by Matthew Chapman over at Raw Story. It would be shorter, I'm sure, to read that. But it's interesting. Let me put that on hold and think about where we want to include that. Instead, maybe that's something we can discuss later in the week. And again, we're really going to have to work out how we're going to deal with the rest of the week. Let me swing back to John Solomon. I know we read, or at least I moved from Pocket into the Pocket archives, some of the materials about Solomon and how he came to be in this position and what his interest was in selling the Giuliani, what do you call it? The Giuliani theory and all of this. But I don't know whether we really got all of the story out there. Why isn't this searching the archive like I was hoping for? John Solomon. I found there's two other articles that we've got in the current pocket section here, not the archive, one of which we read part of. Yeah, okay, so in the archives we have the one we read from the Daily Beast. Remember this one? Water finds its level as Fox News hires dictator-loving, deep state-loathing John Solomon. I think we talked about that. And one of them we hit on before. There was an article in Just Security that had been written by Sidney Blumenthal. It was 12 questions for John Solomon, and we summarized some of the questions because we were reading at the end of the show, and we're going to be doing that again probably, and we skipped around a little bit, but maybe it's worth giving a second look at that. But in the meantime, I also thought perhaps a quick hit, and maybe quicker hit here from Talking Points Memo. Back on November 18th, Kate Riga, R-I-G-A, writing this piece, bringing Solomon back into the news, and we never really discussed this one. The Hill, the publication, announces that it is reviewing old John Solomon columns in light of the fact that we're now finding out how much of a part of the plot he really was in all this. And the Blumenthal questions get to the heart of some of that in a more piercing way once they're stated, but they're roundabout in getting to those points. So it's difficult to read through that list. All right. The Hill editor-in-chief Bob Cusack sent out a memo to the staff Monday, and this is back November 18th, 2019, so a couple weeks ago, alerting them that old opinion columns written by former editorialist John Solomon and referenced frequently in the impeachment inquiry may be annotated, corrected, or fact-checked. And remember that they are opinion columns, but he was originally writing on the actual news side while arguably conflicted with other roles and bringing in funding for the Hill. And they moved him to the opinion side to try and alleviate some of the problems of having him on the news reporting side. But then once over in the opinion side, he was apparently too problematic even for that. Not only did they end up dismissing him, but the editor-in-chief says, yeah, we're going to do a wholesale review of everything that he was writing over there, and some of the things that Republicans in particular relied on as evidence for their arguments might just not be operative here. The statement via a CNN reporter, let's see, is that what's embedded here? Is this Oliver Darcy's tweet? Is Oliver Darcy the CNN reporter we're talking about? Yes. Okay. The Hill editor-in-chief Bob Cusack just sent this email out to the staff announcing that the outlet is reviewing, updating, annotating, and when appropriate, correcting columns by John Solomon. You want to know the note? Let's take a look at it. Is it that long? No. Okay. Note about John Solomon. As you are aware, John Solomon left the Hill earlier in the fall. He just left. But in light of recent congressional testimony and related events, we wanted to apprise you of the steps we're taking regarding Solomon's opinion columns, which were referenced in the impeachment inquiry. Because of our dedication to accurate, nonpartisan reporting and standards, we are reviewing, updating, annotating, and with any denials of witnesses, and when appropriate, correcting any opinion pieces referenced during the ongoing congressional inquiry. As previously stated, the views expressed by the contributors are their own and not the views of the Hill. We reiterate that we do not condone sending material out before publication, which he did. The Hill remains committed to giving voice to views across the political divide. Okay. Is that worth anything? We don't know. TPM continues with this comment. Solomon worked in concert with Rudy Giuliani associate Lev Parnas and published pieces that touched off a smear campaign at the heart of the impeachment inquiry. He published one article including claims from Yuri Lutsenko, then Ukraine's top prosecutor, that a U.S. diplomat presented him with a list of people not to prosecute. We know that story. Lutsenko also said that he was reviving an investigation into Burisma Holdings. You know why. Solomon has acknowledged that Parnas connected him to Lutsenko. So Parnas is connecting everybody here. And by the way, don't forget in all of this, Solomon represented by Tensing in all this. Very odd. The Ukraine prosecutor later walked back the entire story, saying that he asked the State Department for the names. He's the one that initiated all of that. Interesting. U.S. officials there say that there was no such list and that the entire story is a fabrication. You didn't even ask us for it. Lutsenko has also admitted that he saw no evidence of wrongdoing by the Bidens. The Hill is trying to do some damage control after being dragged into multiple witness testimonies thus far. So that's the quick hit from TPM on this. Maybe we would pay a little earlier in the show this time to start again on Sidney Blumenthal's November 5th list of a dozen questions for John Solomon, some of which have been answered, I assume, by now in the hearings and reactions from the Hill and general reaction to John Solomon and what he's doing. President Donald Trump's attempt to force the government of Ukraine to investigate former Vice President Joe Biden was launched through a disinformation campaign whose first and chief propagator was John Solomon, a conservative columnist with a pattern of publishing false and misleading stories. His work, according to the Washington Post, has played an important role in advancing a flawed, Trump-friendly tale of corruption in Ukraine. I bet we know which one it is. Solomon began his career as a reporter for the Associated Press, but subsequently bounced around in right-wing media, from the Washington Times to a website called Circa News, remember, owned by Sinclair Media and now defunct. In 2012, the Columbia Journalism Review concluded that Solomon, quote, has a history of bending the truth to his storyline, unquote, and, quote, distorting facts and hyping petty stories, unquote. It fits in. Anyway, among his claims to infamy is publishing the debunked Uranium One conspiracy. By the way, speaking of Uranium One, well, they are, but it occurred to me the other day, and Armando made this comment to me on Twitter the other day, that, Uranium One controversy came to mind. Maybe we even mentioned it. One of the shows in the previous week or two where we were discussing that the anti-corruption practice among many Western democracies of distributing, even exaggeratedly, distributing authority for decision-making and most particularly money spending, as we do here in the United States, for instance, with splitting responsibility as between authorizing funding for something and then appropriating money for authorized programs. Or in the case of Ukraine, which is this is where they picked it up from, was the Western view of how to minimize corruption. The decision-making on mineral drilling rights that Rick Perry was so interested in pursuing on behalf of his friends and donors, that he sought out from Ukraine, but Ukrainians at our instruction, or at the Western government instruction, in their effort to stamp out corruption in their country, had distributed the decision-making authority among several hands, so that no one person was in charge of handing out mineral drilling rights. And just as no one person is not supposed to be responsible for actually sending out taxpayer funds, and that's part of what made what Trump had done here with the Ukraine aid so egregious, was we have this system in place where multiple hands have to come together in order to send money out the door. And he was overriding that and saying one and only one hand, and a tiny hand at that, can be the one to make that determination about whether the funding is going out the door or not. And in fact, he's worked the other side too. Congress has refused to fund certain projects of importance, let's say, to Donald Trump, and he has found ways of grabbing hold of several $billion despite their refusal to grant it. So not only is he holding up money that they are affirmatively appropriating, he is grabbing money that they are affirmatively refusing to appropriate. This is extraordinarily dangerous, really, across the board. But let's focus on the petty for just a few minutes, shall we? But again, the Uranium One conspiracy came to mind for Armando. I had it in the back of my mind when I was talking about it as well. One of the reasons why it never got any real serious traction among normal people as a scandal for Hillary Clinton was that the story here was that Hillary Clinton had unilaterally somehow arranged for the sale of Uranium One to Russians. Well, of course, this is Republicans complaining of this. Now Republicans love Russians, so we don't know what the problem was to begin with, but it certainly looked bad. Uranium, that's nuclear weapons. Russians, that's bad, right? Bad thing to give Russians nuclear materials. Hillary Clinton, you did it. Remember, of course, that the sale had to be reviewed by I can't remember the name of the official body that was tasked with reviewing and approving any such purchase. It may or may not come to me. Maybe it'll come to you. Producers, you can send that one on via Twitter, perhaps. But yeah, the whole point was, in debunking all of that, we found that Hillary Clinton was one of, you'll never guess, several voices that had to weigh in order to make this purchase happen. In other words, in order to prevent corruption of the sort that John Solomon, among many other Republicans, was trying to lodge against Hillary Clinton. In order to prevent exactly that sort of corruption, the decision-making had been distributed, and it therefore never rested in Hillary Clinton's hands alone, or even primarily in Hillary Clinton's hands. And so, not likely to really score any points against her, but nonetheless, it was, the complaints were made anyway. And who was at the center of it? John Solomon. Here he is again, still not understanding how decisions are actually made in Western countries, in Westernizing countries like Ukraine, and I guess relying probably not unwisely on the lack of knowledge among his readership for the efficacy of these distributed decision-making systems. Okay, but I guess he had some mild success there with that one and thought he could run the same play again. A lot of this is just the same play over and over, it seems. Firtash was running the same thing. So is Solomon. They're both represented by the same people. That's the same play. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? Starting in March of this year, to return to Cynthia Blumenthal's thinking on it, Solomon's articles in The Hill and his tweets spun out a web of conspiracy theories, in some cases then tweeted by Trump. What? No way. It's almost as though they had a direct line to one another. What was the conspiracy, or what were they? That parts of the Ukrainian government, in coordination with the U.S. ambassador to the Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, colluded to help Hillary Clinton's campaign by leaking financial records of Paul Manafort, Trump's campaign chairman, who had been a consultant to the Russian-backed Ukrainian president deposed in the 2014 revolution, Viktor Yanukovych. Also that the U.S. ambassador had pressured the Ukraine prosecutor not to investigate a George Soros-backed group and Soros-connected names who helped the Clinton campaign in the alleged scheme. I guess this takes things a step further. Not only did Yovanovitch give Poroshenko, is that right? The list, or not, I guess it was Lutsenko, who was the prosecutor general for Poroshenko. Not only did she, it's claimed, give him a list of names not to be prosecuted, but that the list was of Soros's friends. And he's going to throw the old George Soros trope into this one, just to really make sure it catches fire among the right wing. There's also the conspiracy theory that the ambassador told the prosecutor not to investigate a list of individuals, and according to the prosecutor, former Vice President Joe Biden was supposedly attempting to quash the prosecutor's probe of his son Hunter's involvement with Burisma, blah, blah, blah. Solomon depicted a second innocent victim of these conspiracies in addition to Trump, Ukrainian oligarch Dmitry Firtash. Somehow, out of all the people in the world, the other innocent person being wrongly targeted here, who also, by the way, happens to have been represented by the same lawyers representing Solomon. So Vicky Tensing says, hey, John, I got an idea. Maybe you can't pay our huge bills. One thing you might be able to do to help us out, maybe, I don't know, or maybe he was paying his bills just fine, I don't know, is you could write a column about how innocent our other client, Dmitry Firtash, is. And for instance, maybe Dmitry Firtash, who's a billionaire, might be motivated to pay your legal bills. I don't really know exactly whether that happened or not, but just thought we'd throw that in there. Yes. Thanks to Athena 5000, who tells us that the distributed decision-making mechanism in place for the Uranium One decision here in the United States, the Committee on Foreign Investments in the United States. It's the CFIUS, right? That's the acronym for it. And she's also sent me here some factcheck.org facts on Uranium One. Perhaps we'll throw those into the roundup as well in case you are somehow unfamiliar or maybe gone hazy on the Uranium One story. All right. So for just some reason, Solomon decides to depict a second innocent victim in these conspiracy theories, in addition to Trump, the other being Dmitry Firtash. One, the president of the United States, the other, a Ukrainian oligarch. What the hell, right? He is, of course, according to Solomon, a major target of the Soros group. Firtash, close to Russian President Vladimir Putin and Russian mafia kingpin Semyon Mogilevich, and a chief financier of former Ukrainian President Yanukovych, is fighting extradition to avoid U.S. federal charges of bribery and racketeering. Solomon wrote that Robert Mueller's investigation was attempting to frame Firtash to get, quote, some dirt on Donald Trump, but that the case against Firtash was, quote, falling apart. Solomon stated, the oligarch's defense team told me that Firtash rejected the deal because he didn't have credible information or evidence. Interesting. So again, that should be read how the Firtash defense team, who is also my lawyer, told me that the defense was falling apart, even though now having had a direct meeting with Barr asking him to please drop the case, Barr realizes too hot to handle and has turned and run in the other direction as quickly as possible. Doesn't sound like a case that's falling apart, but maybe then they thought it was. The State Department labeled the charges in Solomon's initial article about Yovanovitch an outright fabrication. Later, the Ukrainian prosecutor Solomon quoted as his source, Yuri Lutsenko, was dismissed from his position and disavowed Solomon's reporting, saying that Hunter Biden did not violate anything, and now said that his statements to Solomon about a do not prosecute list were false. Lutsenko is now under criminal investigation for abuse of power. Meanwhile, the effort to extradite Firtash to face corruption charges continues. When the scandal broke about Trump and Ukraine, uncomfortable facts emerged about Solomon that cast a new light on how he came to write his articles. Solomon admitted that he had used Lev Parnas to arrange his interviews and serve as his translator. So that's where Tensing and DeGeneva, I guess, got the idea. Solomon also sent his work in draft form to Parnas, apparently for vetting. Parnas, along with his associate Igor Fruman, worked closely with Rudy Giuliani, Trump's personal attorney, on the Ukraine intrigues, and were reportedly trying to alter the management of Naftogaz, a Ukrainian oil and gas company, to obtain lucrative contracts. Parnas paid Giuliani $500,000 for consulting on his company called Fraud Guarantee, while Firtash paid Parnas through DeGeneva and Tensing as a translator. CNN reported on the scale of Firtash's financial support for Parnas. We'll take a look at that again just after we pause and remind you that Parnas, the part where it says Parnas paid Giuliani $500,000 for consulting on Fraud Guarantee. No, he paid them to be his lawyer and yet paid the money to his consulting company, which is weird. But you could say, oh, well, maybe they had it wrong. Maybe he did pay $500,000 for consulting, and that's why the consultancy, Giuliani Partners, was paid. But remember, Giuliani Partners is a cybersecurity consulting firm, not a natural gas contracting consulting firm. And the claim was that Giuliani was the attorney for Parnas and Fruman and Fraud Guarantee. Then we found out that Parnas didn't even pay the $500,000 Charles Gucciardo paid the $500,000. And again, not to Giuliani, not to his law firm, but rather to his consulting firm. All very strange. Now, so Parnas arranged for Gucciardo, we'll correct this record, to pay Giuliani's consulting firm $500,000 for legal representation of fraud guarantee, while Firtash was paying Parnas through diGenova and Tensing as a, quote, translator, the $200,000 finder's fee coming out of their $1.2 million in legal fees. CNN, next, reported on the scale of Firtash's financial support for Parnas. And it says here, Parnas boasted that his newfound luxurious lifestyle was bankrolled by Firtash, two sources told CNN. Beginning in mid-August, this included around-the-clock bodyguards, 2 luxury SUVs for his entourage, and at least 6 private charter flights in the past several months. He talked about how he was cultivating Firtash for his own business interests. "I'm the best paid interpreter in the world," Parnas joked. Remember, we heard that last week. On October 10th, Parnas and Fruman were indicted on federal charges of conspiracy for fraudulent campaign contributions. The indictment states that a Russian national, who is not Firtash, he's a Ukrainian national, arranged for 2 $500,000 wires on or about September 18th, 2018, and October 16th, 2018, to be sent from overseas accounts to a U.S. corporate bank account controlled by Fruman and another individual. Is that the other guy who got arrested in all this? diGenova and Tensing, associates of Giuliani, surfaced as Parnas and Fruman's attorneys. Fruman too, huh? They are also the lawyers for Dmitry Firtash, who was revealed to be the source of the original disinformation about Biden, which Firtash's attorneys delivered to Giuliani. Then Politico disclosed that diGenova and Tensing are Solomon's lawyers as well. Solomon gave them at least one of his stories fully in draft form before it appeared. He says for fact-checking purposes. Unsurprising, since they orchestrated his sources. Solomon claimed that he met Parnas through former Congressman Pete Sessions, a Republican from Texas who had accepted campaign contributions from Parnas and Fruman and did their bidding in writing a letter to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo demanding the dismissal of Yovanovitch, who was an obstacle to the Giuliani scheme against Biden. Giuliani gave Pompeo a packet of Solomon's articles in the effort to instigate Yovanovitch's firing. Is that what ended up being delivered to the committee from the State Department IG? Maybe. Immediately after the Trump-Ukraine scandal was exposed, Solomon abruptly left his perch at the Hill, was hired by Fox News, where he had previously appeared dozens of times to amplify his conspiracy theories. Now, he poses behind the image of an investigative reporter at Fox News while maintaining radio silence about the details of his own convoluted role. In recent weeks, Trump, Hannity, and Giuliani have all proclaimed that Solomon deserves a Pulitzer Prize. Many questions about Solomon's part in the disinformation operation remain unanswered, and only now do we get around to those dozen questions. And let's see if we can burn through a couple of them here. Did you ever take money or benefit directly or indirectly from Dmitry Firtash? Did diGenova and Tensing introduce you to Firtash to serve as your source? Was it before they formally became his attorneys? To whom and how much did Firtash pay to generate and circulate the disinformation you published? How much did you pay Parnas? This is only question 2. How much did you pay Parnas? Was it your own money? Whose money was it? Was your employment or use of Parnas arranged by diGenova and Tensing? Explain the involvement of your attorneys in the full range of your transactions with Parnas. Number 3, when did you hire diGenova and Tensing as your attorneys and for what matters? How much have you paid them? Over how long a period of time and for which specific services? How many articles have you written that included information provided from sources you knew to be clients of your lawyers, diGenova and Tensing? And on what topics? That is an interesting question, and it's number 4 in this list. Number 5, when you were publishing stories about the Clintons' alleged involvement with the Uranium One company, did you tell your editors that one or more of your sources were represented by your lawyer, Victoria Tensing? Beyond relying on your lawyer, what due diligence did you do to assess the credibility of those now discredited sources? Number 6, Rudy Giuliani sent Pompeo a file containing your articles and raw interview notes that you conducted in the effort to fire Yovanovitch. Were you aware beforehand that Giuliani was involving Pompeo in the scheme? Now we have those emails. Did the full scope of your involvement with and knowledge of Giuliani's activities. Number 7, you claim that you met Parnas through Congressman Pete Sessions. When did you first become aware that Parnas and Fruman's their financial contributions to Sessions? What other favors has Sessions done for you? We'll try and fit in one more here. In your stories on Attorney General William Barr's probe of the origins of the investigation of the Russian intervention in the 2016 elections, in which you've claimed that FBI abuses and, quote, troubling questions about the Mueller report, are you relying on DeGeneva and Tensing, longtime associates of Barr, in communication with him to help you? One more. Why not? Number 9, did you enlist your attorneys to speak to Attorney General Barr to help you get a new job at Fox News from its chairman, Rupert Murdoch? Was the subject of your employment raised in their meeting on October 9th? There's more, but as it stands, we're going to wrap things up here and hand the microphone over to Justice Putnam, who knows there's more and collects it from around the world for your listening pleasure.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Well, much more discussion, I'm sure, of the firing of the Secretary of the Navy coming up next. You know he'll be all over that subject. Let's see, Nancy Pelosi attacking Donald Trump, can you believe it? This time over his backing off of his campaign promise of a bill to lower drug prices. That's what happens with those Trump comments.